In the summer of 1957, a county health inspector named Roland Pritchard was dispatched to a remote property in the Cumberland Gap region of eastern Kentucky. The complaint was mundane. Neighbors reported a strange smell drifting from the old Merrick homestead, a crumbling farmhouse tucked into a hollow so deep that sunlight barely touched its walls. Pritchard expected spoiled livestock, maybe an overflowing septic tank. What he found instead was a marriage certificate, water-stained and crumbling, tucked inside a rusted filing cabinet in the cellar. The date was April 1949. The groom's name was Silas Merrick, age 53. The bride's name was Coraline Merrick, age 14. And in the space marked Father of the Bride, someone had written in careful cursive, Silas Merrick. The inspector stood there in the dark, his flashlight trembling over the ink. Behind him, the smell was coming from something else entirely. A root cellar door, nailed shut from the outside with a padlock rusted through. When he finally pried it open, he found 7 unmarked graves, shallow and recent, dug into the dirt floor. But the bodies weren't strangers. According to the county coroner's report filed 3 weeks later, they were all Merricks. And every single one of them shared the same last name, the same bloodline, and the same father. Before we go further, subscribe and comment with your state. It keeps these buried histories from vanishing into silence. The Merrick family didn't start as monsters. They started as survivors. Silas Merrick was born in 1896 in a single-room cabin near the Virginia-Kentucky border, the youngest of 9 children. His father, Ezekiel Merrick, was a coal prospector who disappeared into a mine collapse in 1904, leaving the family destitute. By the time Silas was 12, he was working the lumber camps, dragging timber down mountainsides for pennies a day. He never learned to read. He never went to school. And by the time he was 17, he'd saved enough money to buy 40 acres of worthless land deep in the Cumberland woods, land so remote that the census takers didn't even know it existed. He built his house there, a 2-story structure with no windows on the north side, rooms that connected in strange loops, and a cellar dug so deep that the temperature never changed. Neighbors said the house felt wrong, like it had been built according to some blueprint that defied logic. Doors opened into walls, staircases led to dead ends, and in the back bedroom, there was a cradle that Silas carved himself, big enough for 2 infants to sleep side by side. In 1918, Silas married his first wife, a woman named Ida Shackelford. She was 16. He was 22. The marriage was recorded in the county ledger, signed by a traveling preacher who'd stopped in the hollow for one night and never returned. Ida gave birth to 7 children over the next 12 years. But by 1930, according to the census records, only 3 of them were still alive. The others had no death certificates, no burial records. They simply vanished from the paperwork, as if they'd never existed at all. Ida died in 1933. The cause of death, according to the county coroner, was complications from childbirth, though she hadn't been pregnant at the time. Her body was buried on the property, in a grave marked only by a pile of stones. And 3 months later, Silas remarried. His second bride was named Loretta. She was 15 years old, and according to the handwritten church ledger kept by a Baptist minister in the neighboring county, Loretta's maiden name was also Merrick. She was Silas's niece, the daughter of his older brother who died in a logging accident 5 years prior. Loretta Merrick gave birth to 9 children between 1934 and 1946. 6 survived past infancy. Their names were recorded in a family Bible that was later seized by state authorities: Coraline, Ephraim, Dulcie, Silas Jr., Naomi, and Harlan. The children rarely left the property. Neighbors reported seeing them only a handful of times, pale, silent figures standing in the tree line at dusk, watching the road. A schoolteacher from the nearest town, a woman named Constance Hale, wrote in her diary in 1941 that she'd attempted to visit the Merrick homestead to offer lessons. She was turned away at gunpoint by Silas, who told her his children didn't need the outside world. Hale noted that she'd seen one of the children through a window. A boy, she thought, though his face was so malformed that she couldn't be sure. His eyes, she wrote, were too far apart, and his jaw hung open in a way that suggested it had never fully formed. Loretta died in 1947. The cause of death was listed as fever, though the attending physician, a country doctor named Emil Voss, wrote in his personal notes that he suspected poisoning. Voss had been called to the house twice in the months before Loretta's death, both times to treat unexplained illness. He noted that Loretta had bruises on her arms, consistent with restraint, and that she'd begged him, in whispers, to take her daughters away from the house. He didn't. He later told a colleague that he was afraid of Silas Merrick, that the man had dead eyes, like something had burned out behind them. Loretta was buried beside Ida in the family plot behind the house, and 6 months later, Silas held another wedding. The bride was Coraline. She was 14 years old. She was his daughter. Roland Pritchard's report, filed with the Kentucky Department of Health on August 12, 1957, is 37 pages long. Most of it is clinical, measurements of the property, notes on structural decay, descriptions of unsanitary conditions. But on page 19, the tone shifts. Pritchard describes entering the cellar and finding the filing cabinet. Inside were not just marriage certificates, but birth records, medical notes, and photographs. The photographs are what broke him. In his report, Pritchard writes, "I have seen poverty. I have seen neglect. I have seen cruelty. But what I saw in those photographs was something else. It was intentional. It was systematic. It was a plan." The images showed children, Merrick children, at various ages. Some were infants, photographed in the oversized cradle. Others were older, standing in front of the house, their faces turned toward the camera. But the faces were wrong. Eyes set at uneven heights, skulls elongated or compressed, limbs bent at angles that defied anatomy. In one photograph, a girl of perhaps 10 years old stood beside Silas, her hand resting on his shoulder. Her fingers had no joints. They were smooth, like wax, and hung limp at her side. Pritchard noted that many of the children in the photographs didn't appear in any official records. There were no birth certificates, no baptismal records, no census entries. They existed only in those images, frozen in silver and shadow, and then they disappeared. Existed only in those images, frozen in silver and shadow, and then they disappeared. But the worst photograph, the one Pritchard couldn't look at for more than a few seconds, was dated April 1949. It showed Silas Merrick standing beside Coraline on their wedding day. She wore a white dress that was too big for her, the hem dragging in the dirt. Her belly was swollen. She was already pregnant. The child, according to a birth record filed 6 months later, was a boy named Abel. The certificate listed Silas as the father. It listed Coraline as the mother. And in the space marked mother's maiden name, someone had written Merrick. The 7 bodies Pritchard found in the root cellar were exhumed over the course of 3 weeks. The county coroner, a man named Dr. Hugh Kellerman, supervised the process. His autopsy reports, now stored in the Kentucky State Archives, make for grim reading. The bodies belonged to children, aged between 2 and 16. All of them showed signs of severe genetic abnormalities. One infant had no eye sockets, just smooth bone where the eyes should have been. Another child, estimated to be around 8 years old, had a spinal column that curved so severely it had punctured the skin. A teenage girl had 2 sets of teeth, one growing behind the other, her jaw unable to close. But the most disturbing finding was in the bone marrow analysis. Dr. Kellerman noted that the children shared an unprecedented degree of genetic similarity, more consistent with cloning than reproduction. Their DNA, he wrote, suggested that they were the product of multi-generational consanguinity so extreme that it bordered on biological collapse. In layman's terms, the Merrick bloodline had folded in on itself so many times that it was no longer viable. The children weren't just inbred. They were the inevitable endpoint of a family tree that had stopped branching decades ago, but the autopsies revealed something else too. Several of the children showed signs of ritual scarring, deliberate cuts, arranged in patterns on their chests and backs. Dr. Kellerman couldn't identify the symbols, but he noted that they were too precise to be accidental and appeared to follow some kind of system. When asked by state investigators if he believed the scarring was religious in nature, Kellerman replied, "If it was religion, it wasn't any religion I recognize." On September 4, 1957, state police raided the Merrick homestead. They brought a warrant, 3 patrol cars, and a social worker from the county welfare office. What they found inside the house would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Silas Merrick was dead. He'd been dead for at least 2 weeks, his body lying in the upstairs bedroom, covered in a sheet. Cause of death was later determined to be a stroke. But he wasn't alone in the house. Living in the cellar were 4 children. Coraline was there too, now 22 years old, her body emaciated, her hair matted. She didn't speak. She didn't react when the officers entered. She just sat in the corner, rocking back and forth, her hands wrapped around her knees. The children ranged in age from 3 to 9. All of them were Coraline's. All of them were Silas's. And according to the medical examinations conducted later, all of them were also genetically consistent with being Coraline's siblings, meaning that Silas had fathered children with Coraline, who was herself his daughter, creating a genetic loop so tangled that the doctors couldn't construct a family tree. The oldest child, a boy named Abel, the same Abel born in 1949, couldn't walk. His legs had never developed properly. His speech was limited to grunts. But when officers tried to remove him from the cellar, he screamed, clawing at the dirt floor, trying to crawl back into the dark. Coraline was taken to a state psychiatric facility. She died there in 1963, 6 years later, without ever speaking a coherent sentence. The children were placed in foster care, but only one of them survived past adolescence. The others succumbed to infections, seizures, or simply stopped breathing in their sleep, their bodies too broken to sustain life. When investigators searched the house, they found a ledger in Silas's bedroom. It was bound in leather, its pages yellowed and brittle. Inside were entries dating back to 1930, written in Silas's shaky hand. The entries weren't diary reflections. They were records, breeding records. Each entry listed a name, a date, and a result. Ida birthed twin sons, April 12, 1920. Both lived 2 days. Loretta birthed daughter, June 3, 1935. Strong jaw. Kept. Coraline. Birthed son, October 18, 1949. Weak lungs. Buried. But the ledger didn't just record births, it recorded pairings. Silas had been planning this for years. He'd been selecting which children to keep, which to breed, which to bury. He'd been building something, generation by generation, tightening the bloodline until it was as pure and as poisoned as it could possibly be. One entry, dated March 1951, read, "Coraline and Abel, first pairing. We'll see if the line holds." Abel was 2 years old. In 1959, the FBI opened a file on the Merrick case, not because of the incest, not because of the child abuse, but because of the symbols. The scarring patterns found on the children's bodies matched markings documented in 2 other cases, one in rural Arkansas in 1932, another in the Appalachian foothills of Tennessee in 1945. Both cases involved isolated families, multi-generational incest, and children with severe genetic deformities. Both families had ledgers, both had photographs, and both had used the same symbols. The FBI file, declassified in 1998, suggests that investigators believed there was a network, a loose, unorganized cult of families across the rural South who believed that purity of blood could unlock something. What exactly, the file doesn't say, but it notes that several of the families claimed their deformed children could see things or know things that others couldn't. One interview, conducted with a surviving member of the Arkansas family, includes this exchange. Agent: why did your father do this? Subject: he said the children would be chosen, that God would speak through them. Agent: did they speak? Subject: not with words, but they knew. They knew when someone was coming. They knew when someone was going to die. They knew things before they happened. The file concludes with a note: investigation suspended due to lack of physical evidence. Recommend monitoring similar cases in rural isolate populations. It was never reopened. The Merrick homestead still stands. After the raid, the state seized the property, but no one wanted to buy it. The house sat empty for decades, slowly consumed by the forest. Locals say it's cursed. They say if you go there at night, you can hear children crying from the cellar. They say the cradle is still there, rocking on its own. In 2003, a group of urban explorers broke into the house and filmed their exploration. The footage, uploaded to an early video sharing site, shows the interior in decay, walls collapsing, floors rotted through. But in the cellar, the camera captures something that stops them cold. The filing cabinet, still there, still open, and inside, new photographs, Polaroids, dated 1998. They show children, pale children, standing in the same spots as the children from the 1940s, wearing the same expressions. The explorers left immediately. They never went back, and when authorities investigated, they found nothing. No photographs, no evidence that anyone had been there in years. But in 2011, a hiker reported finding a grave marker in the woods near the property. It was recent, the wood still fresh. The name carved into it was Merrick. No first name, no dates, just the name, and beneath it, a symbol, one of the symbols from the FBI file. The Merrick bloodline ended officially in 1963, when Coraline died in that state hospital, her mind shattered, her body broken. The children she bore have all passed now, their graves scattered across Kentucky, unmarked and forgotten. Silas Merrick's house is condemned, his name erased from county records, his ledger locked away in an archive that few people even know exists. But in the Cumberland Gap, there are still families who won't speak the name Merrick. There are still old women who cross themselves when they pass that hollow. And there are still nights, deep in the Appalachian dark, when hikers report seeing lights in the trees, small, flickering lights, like candles, arranged in patterns that make no sense. The inspectors closed the case. The FBI suspended the investigation. The state buried the files. But the question remains quiet and cold as a root cellar. If the bloodline was designed to create something, and if the children really could see things no one else could see, then what were they looking at in those photographs, standing so still, their eyes fixed on something just beyond the frame? Silas Merrick believed he was building something pure, something chosen, and maybe, in his own twisted way, he succeeded. Because purity, when taken to its absolute extreme, doesn't create angels. It creates ghosts. And ghosts, as any Appalachian will tell you, don't stay buried. They wait, they watch, and they remember. The Merrick name may be gone from the records, but in the deep woods of eastern Kentucky, there are still people who swear they've seen children in the trees. Children with faces that don't quite fit. Children who shouldn't exist. Children who look like they've been waiting for a very, very long time. And if you're ever hiking through the Cumberland Gap and you see a cradle carved into a tree trunk, or a pattern of stones arranged just so, or a house that feels wrong in a way you can't explain, don't stop. Don't look. And whatever you do, don't say the name. Because some bloodlines don't end. They just go underground. And they wait for the world to forget, so they can start again.